There are moments when nothing seems to separate one thing from another, not clearly, not enough to demand attention. A line may exist between what moves and what remains still, but it feels softer than usual, less defined, less important. At first, attention still tries to organize what it sees. It looks for structure, for a place to begin, for something to focus on. That habit appears naturally. Most moments are shaped that way. One thing stands out, another fades into the background. The mind quietly decides what matters first and what matters less. But here, that pattern loosens. Nothing insists on being central. Nothing asks to be interpreted before anything else. The moment does not offer itself in pieces. It appears all at once. And because of that, attention moves differently. At first it still searches, not urgently, just out of familiarity. It scans lightly, as if something might still appear that requires focus. But nothing does. There is no hidden detail waiting to be discovered, no sudden shift forming in the background. Without urgency, the search loses its purpose. It slows. Then gradually it stops. Thought continues to appear. A brief memory, a quiet word, the beginning of a sentence forming somewhere in the background of the mind. These things are not blocked. They are simply not followed. Without urgency, they remain light. They pass through awareness and fade without needing to be completed. There is no effort to push them away, no effort to continue them either. The moment remains steady. Breathing continues quietly. The body rests without adjusting itself. There is no preparation beneath the surface. Nothing suggests that something should happen next. Even time begins to feel less defined. Moments pass, but they do not gather. They do not build into something larger. They simply continue. Without expectation, time loses its pressure. There is no sense of moving towards something, no sense of being behind or ahead. Experience remains where it is. The mind may briefly try to shape the moment. It may ask if this is calm, if it is meaningful, if something should be understood from it. But those questions do not stay. They do not find anything to attach to. The moment does not respond to them. It continues without explanation. This simplicity has an effect. Without something to solve, the need to solve fades. Without contrast, judgment has no place to stand. Without a clear center, attention softens. It spreads gently. Nothing is excluded. Nothing is highlighted. Everything remains evenly present. This evenness does not feel empty. It does not feel like something is missing. It feels complete in a quiet, ordinary way. Nothing needs to be added. Nothing needs to be removed. There is no deeper layer waiting to be uncovered. The moment does not hide anything. It remains on the surface of itself, and that surface is enough. That may be what feels unfamiliar. Not that the moment is special, but that it does not need to become special. The mind often looks for something more, a shift, a meaning, a change that can be recognized. Here that movement is absent. Nothing transforms. The pressure to transform simply fades. And when that pressure fades, attention no longer pushes forward. It no longer looks inward for something deeper. It rests, not completely, not perfectly, but naturally. Thought may return briefly, a small reminder, a faint image, something unfinished. But it does not take over. It appears and fades within the same open space. There is no need to resist it. Nothing in the moment needs protection. This creates a subtle ease, not something that is noticed directly, but something that is felt in the absence of effort. The body reflects this first. The mind follows if it notices at all. Attention no longer asks much from the moment. It does not expect something to appear. It does not expect something to change. What is already here remains enough. The ordinary quality of that is important because it means nothing needs to be held on to. Nothing fragile is present. Nothing rare needs to be preserved. If something were to change, it would belong. If a thought returned more clearly, it would belong. If sound appeared, it would belong. Nothing stands outside the moment. Everything that arises enters the same quiet space. Even small shifts in attention do not break anything. They simply become part of what is happening. The moment remains whole, not because it is held together, but because nothing is separating it. And in that, nothing needs to become anything more. After a while, the moment no longer feels like something that needs to be understood. At first, there may still be a quiet habit of observing it, a subtle checking. Is something happening? Is something changing? But that habit begins to fade, not because it is pushed away, but because it finds nothing to respond to. The moment does not present itself as something to analyze. It does not offer meaning. It does not suggest that something should be taken from it. It simply continues. Attention begins to settle differently. It no longer searches for a center. It no longer tries to decide what matters most. Everything remains present in the same quiet way. Nothing stands out. Nothing disappears. Experience becomes even. Thought still appears from time to time. A small memory may surface. A word may form briefly in the background of the mind. Sometimes a sentence begins but does not finish. Without urgency, thought does not develop. It does not connect to anything else. It remains light. Each thought stands on its own for a moment and then fades. There is no need to follow it, no need to stop it. It simply passes. The moment remains steady. Breathing continues without effort. The body does not adjust. There is no preparation for what might come next. Nothing in the moment suggests that something should happen. Even time begins to feel less structured. Moments pass, but they do not feel like steps. They do not move towards something. They do not build into anything larger. They simply continue. Without expectation, time becomes quiet. It no longer creates pressure. There is no sense of being early, no sense of being late. Experience remains where it is. The mind may briefly try to return to its usual patterns. It may ask if something is missing, if something should be done, if this moment could become something more. But those questions do not stay. They do not find anything to hold on to. The moment does not respond. It continues unchanged. This has a subtle effect. Without something to improve, the need to improve fades. Without something to understand, the need to understand weakens. Attention becomes softer. It spreads gently across the whole moment. Nothing is excluded. Nothing is emphasized. Everything exists together in the same quiet space. This does not feel empty. It does not feel incomplete. It feels simple. And that simplicity remains steady. Even the sense of calm begins to fade into the background. It no longer feels like calm. It feels like normal. There is no contrast. No sense of moving from noise to quiet. Only continuity. Thought may return again. A small image. A brief recognition. Something familiar passing through awareness. But it does not change the moment. It does not pull attention away. It appears and disappears within the same openness. The body remains at ease. Breathing continues naturally. There is no need to adjust anything, no need to correct anything. Nothing requires attention. This absence of demand creates a quiet stability, not something that is maintained, something that simply exists. The mind begins to do less, not intentionally. It just becomes unnecessary to do more. There is nothing to organize, nothing to compare, nothing to control. Without those movements, attention rests, not completely still, not completely empty, just resting. The moment continues without interruption. Nothing begins, nothing ends. There is no transition, no shift that needs to be noticed. Everything remains as it is. Even the idea of holding on to this moment disappears. There is nothing to hold, nothing to preserve. If it changes, it changes. If it stays, it stays. Nothing depends on it. Experience continues, unstructured, unmeasured, undemanding. The ordinary quality of the moment remains untouched. Nothing marks it as important. Nothing frames it as meaningful. It simply continues in the same quiet way. And in that, nothing else needs to be added. Gradually, even the sense of simplicity becomes less noticeable. At first, there may have been a quiet awareness of how little is happening, a subtle recognition that nothing is demanding attention. But over time, even that fades. The moment no longer feels simple. It simply feels normal. There is nothing in it that stands apart, nothing that needs to be pointed out, nothing that needs to be held. Attention remains present, but in a softer way. It does not focus tightly. It does not drift away. It rests lightly within the moment. Thought continues to appear. A small image may pass through awareness. A word may begin to form somewhere in the background. Sometimes it grows slightly clearer, then fades again before it becomes something complete. Without urgency, thought does not gather strength. It does not connect into longer patterns. Each thought appears briefly, then dissolves. There is no need to follow it, no need to push it away. The moment remains unchanged. Breathing continues quietly. The body remains at ease. There is no movement towards something else, no preparation for what might come next. Nothing in the moment suggests that something should happen. Time continues in the same quiet way. Moments pass, but they do not feel like steps. They do not move toward a result. They do not build into anything larger. They simply continue. Without expectation, time becomes softer. It does not create pressure. It does not ask anything from the moment. The mind may briefly return to its usual patterns. It may try to notice whether something is happening. It may look for change. But that movement does not last. There is nothing to find. The moment does not present anything new. It continues in the same open way. This has a quiet effect on attention. Without something to search for, the search fades. Without something to improve, the need to improve disappears. Attention becomes wider, not focused on one thing, not scattered, just open. Everything remains present in the same space. The movement of breath, the presence of the body, the quiet flow of thought. None of it stands above the rest. Nothing becomes central. Nothing becomes background. Everything exists together. This evenness feels natural, not something that needs to be maintained. Something that is simply there when nothing interferes. Thought returns again, a brief memory, a small recognition, something familiar passing through awareness. but it does not stay. Without momentum, it fades. Nothing depends on it. The moment continues. Even the sense of calm is no longer noticeable. It has blended into everything else. It no longer feels like calm. It feels like what is already here. There is no contrast, no movement between different states, only continuity. The body reflects this. Breathing continues naturally. There is no adjustment, no need to change anything. Everything remains as it is. Attention rests without effort. There is no need to hold on to the moment. There is no need to leave it. Nothing pulls attention away. Nothing asks it to stay. It simply remains. The mind does less, not by choice. There is just less to do. Nothing needs to be organized. Nothing needs to be understood. Nothing needs to be controlled. Without those movements, there is a quiet ease, not something that stands out, something that exists in the absence of effort. Time continues to pass. Moments arrive and disappear without leaving anything behind. They do not collect into meaning. They do not form a story. They simply continue. The ordinary quality of the moment becomes clear. Nothing marks it as important. Nothing frames it as meaningful. It does not need to be remembered. It does not need to be extended. It simply exists. And in that, nothing else needs to happen. After some time, even the sense of continuity becomes less noticeable. At first, there may still have been a quiet awareness that the moment was simply continuing, that nothing was interrupting it, and that nothing was pushing it forward. That awareness itself may have felt like something to notice, but gradually even that fades. The moment no longer feels like something that is continuing. It simply feels like what is already here. There is no clear sense of before, no clear sense of after. The idea of time remains, but it no longer defines the experience. Moments pass, but they do not feel like movement from one point to another. They feel more like a steady presence that does not need to go anywhere. Attention remains present, but without effort. It does not try to stay. It does not try to move. It does not check itself. It simply rests where it is. Thought still appears from time to time. A faint memory may surface, or a quiet word may form somewhere in the background of the mind. Sometimes a thought becomes slightly clearer, as if it might continue into something more complete. But without urgency, it does not remain. It softens before it gathers weight. There is no need to follow it. There is no need to stop it. It passes in the same quiet way it appeared. The moment remains unchanged. Breathing continues naturally. The body remains at ease. There is no adjustment, no preparation. Nothing beneath the surface suggests that something is about to happen. Even the subtle readiness that is often present in the body begins to fade. There is no anticipation of interruption, no quiet expectation that something will shift. Everything remains where it is. Time continues, but its role becomes less clear. Seconds pass, but they do not feel counted. They do not accumulate into anything. There is no sense of time being used or wasted. It simply moves in the background without shaping the moment. Without expectation, time becomes almost transparent. The mind may briefly return to its familiar habits. It may try to notice something, to identify a change, to understand what is happening. But that movement does not last. There is nothing defined. Nothing has shifted in a way that needs to be recognized. The moment does not present itself as something to understand. It continues without explanation. This has a quiet effect on attention. Without something to search for, the search fades. Without something to improve, the need to improve disappears. Attention becomes softer, not focused on one thing, not scattered, just open. Everything remains present in the same quiet way. The movement of breath continues without asking to be noticed. The presence of the body remains steady without needing adjustment. The faint movement of thought continues without becoming central. None of it stands out. None of it needs to be highlighted. Everything exists together. There is no center, no edge, no part of the moment that asks to be more important than another. This evenness feels natural, not something that needs to be created, something that appears when nothing interferes. Thought may return again, a brief image, a small recognition, something familiar. It appears clearly for a moment and then fades again before becoming something that requires attention. Without urgency, it cannot grow. Without structure, it cannot remain. The moment continues. Even the sense of calm is no longer noticeable. It has blended completely into the background. It does not feel like calm. It feels like what has always been there. There is no contrast, no shift between different states, only the same steady presence. The body reflects this. Breathing continues naturally. There is no need to change it, no need to guide it. Everything remains as it is. Attention rests without effort. There is no need to hold the moment, no need to extend it, no need to move away from it. Nothing in the moment requires action. The mind does less, not because it has decided to do less, but because there is simply less to do. Nothing needs to be organized. Nothing needs to be understood. Nothing needs to be controlled. Without those movements, there is a quiet ease. Not something that stands out, something that exists in the absence of effort. Time continues to pass. Moments arrive and disappear without leaving anything behind. They do not build into meaning. They do not form a story. They simply continue. The ordinary quality of the moment remains unchanged. Nothing marks it as important. Nothing frames it as meaningful. It does not ask to be remembered. It does not ask to be extended. It simply remains. And because it simply remains, nothing else needs to happen. Eventually, even the sense of presence becomes less noticeable. At first, there may have been a quiet awareness of simply being here, a subtle recognition that nothing needed to change, that nothing was asking for attention. But over time, even that awareness fades. The moment no longer feels like something that is being observed. It simply feels like what is. There is no separation between awareness and experience, no distance between what is noticed and what is noticing. Everything exists in the same quiet way. Attention remains, but it no longer recognizes itself as attention. It does not feel like something that is doing anything. It does not feel like something that needs to remain steady. It simply exists without effort. Thought continues to appear, a faint image, a small fragment of a sentence, something that begins softly and fades before it becomes complete. Without urgency, thought does not gather strength. It does not form into something that needs to be followed. It appears and then disappears. The moment remains unchanged. Breathing continues quietly. The body remains at ease. There is no preparation, no anticipation. Nothing in the moment suggests that something is about to happen. Time continues to pass, but without structure. Moments do not feel like movement. They do not feel like steps. They do not build toward anything. They simply continue. Without expectation, time loses its shape. It no longer defines the moment. It moves quietly in the background without asking to be noticed. The mind may briefly return again, a small attempt to recognize something, to understand what is happening, to see if something has changed. But that movement does not last. There is nothing to find. Nothing has shifted in a way that needs to be understood. The moment does not present itself as something to interpret. It continues without explanation. This has a quiet effect. Without something to notice, the need to notice fades. Without something to hold on to, the need to hold disappears. Attention becomes even softer, wider, more open. Everything remains present in the same quiet way. The movement of breath, the presence of the body, the faint flow of thought. None of it stands apart. None of it asks to be emphasized. Everything exists together. There is no center, no boundary, only the same open continuity. This does not feel like something special. It does not feel like a state that needs to be maintained. It feels ordinary, simple, complete in its own way. Thought may return again briefly, a memory, a word, a small recognition. But it does not remain. Without urgency, it fades. Nothing holds it. Nothing carries it forward. The moment continues. Even the sense of stillness is no longer noticeable. It has blended completely into everything else. It does not stand out. It does not ask to be recognized. It simply is. The body reflects this. Breathing continues naturally. There is no adjustment, no need to change anything. Everything remains as it is. Attention rests without effort. There is no need to stay, no need to leave. Nothing in the moment requires movement. The mind does less, not because it has decided to do less, but because there is nothing that needs to be done. Nothing needs to be organized. Nothing needs to be understood. Nothing needs to be controlled. Without those movements, there is a quiet ease, not something that stands out, something that exists when nothing interferes. Time continues to pass. Moments arrive and disappear without leaving anything behind. They do not gather into meaning. They do not form a story. They simply continue. The ordinary quality of the moment remains untouched. Nothing marks it as important. Nothing frames it as meaningful. It does not ask to be remembered. It does not ask to be extended. It simply remains. And in that, everything continues exactly as it is.